Yeah.
And also
Okay.
like we're just at Mercury retrograde. So hi everyone. So I was like, we're just at Mercury retrograde. Hello. Today I am so excited to have one of my fellow dietitians, a better nutrition provider, Carol Landau here with me, and I wanted to interview her because I'm trying to get more information about prebiotics out to the world, and I was like, why don't I go to the guru? So Kara runs a company called Uplift. She also has an awesome Australian accent, so it's fun to listen to her. So without further ado, Kara, I thought we would start with just having you share a little bit about yourself. What got you into the land of prebiotic?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So I have been focused on prebiotics for the last 7 years now. So probably a bit before its time, when probiotics were only started to be spoken about. I got into it because I wrote a book, back then trying to work out what food could influence your mood, and everything was leading me to gut health, but in particular to prebiotics
Mm.
as this special fuel to feed all the probiotics in our gut. So I have been passionately promoting this message ever since.
Oh, that's amazing. So, not a lot of people know. I get when I ask the question, "What is a prebiotic?" to others, I get some really interesting answers. So, in this era of some people not being familiar with the term probiotic, let's just start with a language discussion. And I think
Yes.
that's going to be one of the ways you can be the most helpful is really helping other nutrition providers understand what truly is a prebiotic.
Okay, fantastic. Yes, so a lot of people are still confused, and that's probably because even the definition of a prebiotic keeps changing as science keeps evolving. So currently, what we would call a prebiotic, in very simple terms, is the fuel for the probiotics. But I'll give you a bit more because I know I'm speaking to people that are interested for a bit more depth.
Mm.
Prebiotics are non-digestible substrates that are able to fuel the good probiotics and then able to have a beneficial effect on us.
Mm.
So all those factors are actually really important. So what you might have heard me there say or not say is that I said substrates, they're non-digestible substrates, and that's because a lot of people always associate prebiotics as fibers. And they say that it has to be a non-digestible fiber. But what we've discovered is that it's actually not just fibers. There is things like polyphenols that are able to have prebiotic benefits. There are things called resistant starches, and I'll hopefully go into more of that with you today. But that's one of the really important factors. And then it has to have a benefit to us. So it can't just feed the probiotics. We actually have to benefit as the host, as the human.
Oh, I love that. So it's like instead of taking the word superfood, which means nothing, right? It's like what we're actually really talking about, like what's great for us and also what's great for the bacteria in terms of them thriving. I think it's so important because we see so many probiotics just being thrown into the gut, into the body, into creams, into all these places. And to your point, without them being able to not just live but thrive, we're not going to see their consistent benefits. So I love it. So,
Yeah.
actually, around the question of fibers, I think this is really important. You threw out a couple of different words in there, resistant starch. So, let's go ahead and define resistant starch, and then we'll come back and have a conversation about fiber in general.
Sure. So resistant starch is literally, as the name suggests, it is starch that is resistant to digestion. So similarly to the way that a fiber operates, it will pass through our digestive system and it will end up selectively fueling the good gut bacteria. So it's actually a particularly potent and beneficial prebiotic.
Mm. And in
Yeah.
terms of, if you had to just list off like, three, four resistant starches, where what would you list off?
So in terms of food products that would contain some resistant starch, is that
Yes,
what you mean?
exactly. Yep.
Yeah, so some of the richer sources of resistant starch naturally would be things like potato starch, as
Mm.
long as it's unmodified. Green banana flour is another super dense source. And then other foods that can develop resistant starch is something like if you roast and then cool a potato, or you heat pasta and then you cool it, the same with rice, you actually can develop resistant starch.
Interesting. So right there we have. So we're going to talk about green banana flour in a second, but right there we have
Yeah.
three foods that I think most Americans think are on their absolutely no, you should never have list, right? So I get the potato conversation, just banana in general, and pasta. And so you're actually talking about, you might have just made like, it's like when I talk about magnesium and chocolate, it's like everybody wants to be my friend. So, so you're actually thinking that those foods are good choices for us, and how do you balance that out with the fact that they also have carbohydrate that maybe or a higher source, or in the case of pasta, might not be something that people are recommending?
Yeah, for sure. So multiple facets here. When the resistant starch develops, we no longer absorb all those calories from those carbohydrates. So you do not get the spike in blood glucose levels, and you don't get all the calories. They're actually going to be utilized by our gut bacteria. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So it almost sort of lowers the carbohydrate content. That's not the scientific way of saying it, but it does make it, your body will respond differently to it. In addition, portion control is still relevant. And then I guess it's just also important for people to think that something like the green banana flour, you only need a tiny bit, because it's so dense in resistant starch, that in the end, it actually can fit very well into things like ketogenic diets and low carbohydrate diets.
And so green banana flour, so we're not talking about like having a banana and dehydrating it and turning it into flour. Tell us a little bit about green banana flour, where it's sourced, where people can get it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so look, if you're happy to eat an unripe green banana, then that is another option. I just find that most people are not so interested in the flavor or texture of that, which is why I recommend the flour. It is literally the unripe bananas that would usually go to waste. They've been now reused to turn into a flour where they lock in all the nutrients, and that's the resistant starch. The resistant starch can range, depending on the manufacturer, from about 35% up to 68%. Of the carbohydrate content. And from that, you either can buy it as, you'll find some brands just have plain green banana flour, but it's promoted as a baking flour. That's usually the lower percentage resistant starch. So, and also when you bake with it, you actually lose the resistant starch. So that's important.
I feel like all of a sudden, if you're, and even if you were trying to make flour and you decided to bake it, that's why I said dehydrating. So yeah, that seems nonsensical.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Good
point.
So that's part of the marketing and the misinformation that is out there. But I've included in the Daily Uplifter, the product that I've created, I've included that high percentage resistant starch, and I do recommend, if people want to reap the benefits at a maximum, that they consume it raw in a smoothie, into energy or protein balls, etc.
I love that. Okay, awesome. Okay, and we are going to get into Uplift foods, because I'm so excited for people to try the Daily Uplift, which is now available in the U.S. So that's like totally awesome. I got a sneak peek of it, a sneak taste of it, and it was using it in smoothies. And I actually really noticed some key differences. So whether it's skin health or digestive health, I think, this is really helpful. I want to talk for a second. So we had talked a little bit about fibers. There's a miscommunication, which you addressed, that people think of prebiotics as only fibers. But one of the questions people are asking me, and again, remember, in this particular audience, we have a lot of healthcare providers, is often the question about do you count when you're looking at how much fiber you need to get in the day? In the U.S., we have our insoluble, our soluble fiber. It's like, hey, let's try to get 25, 30 grams. Some people are including prebiotics in that part, but what you're saying is that actually your prebiotics could be, your intake could be across your whole, all of the foods that you take in. And so how do you help guide someone to get an appreciable amount of prebiotics in their day?
Okay, yeah. So depending on the type of prebiotic will depend on how much you actually need to get a beneficial dose. So there are some prebiotics where we literally have been shown to only need 1 to 2 grams, and that will have that bifidogenic positive effect in our gut. And that is something like, it's called a xylo-oligosaccharide. I apologize for the mouthful. It's written on a label as XOS, X-O-S. But then you have other types of prebiotic fibers, such as, again, it's going to be a mouthful, but an isomalto-oligosaccharide, which is the IMO that you find in a lot of those high protein bars that say they've got 13 to 17 grams of fiber in them. And those sorts of prebiotics, we actually need probably up at 30 grams a day to get the beneficial prebiotic effect. So I think that as a health professional, when you're trying to recommend people how much to get, I don't think it's a bad thing to incorporate it as part of that fiber, that fiber quotient that we're going for. Put it into the soluble fiber section because the insoluble fibers are not prebiotics. But then, as I've just said, there will be some that you might get your prebiotic amount from that 1 to 2 grams, and then you still do need to get the other amount from other foods.
From your other place on that part. So you also threw in, I learn as we go along, which is awesome. So you threw in a term, you said bifidogenic, right? And so one of the things, that's like music to my ears, because bifidobacteria changed my entire outlook on life, my belly, my entire experience. It's why I do what I do today. And so one of the questions that people will ask is, are there prebiotics that feed certain probiotics? If you don't know what we're talking about here, we're talking about the fact that in the world of probiotics, there are different strains, and strain specificity is really important. So you might have Lactobacillus acidophilus, or in a yogurt, you might see that there's Streptococcus. And now in yogurts, thankfully, and also in supplements, you'll see bifidobacteria. And bifidobacteria is very important for really grounding and helping the population of our good bacteria. So I'm wondering if prebiotics have a bifidobacteria, do you see what I'm saying? Are there some prebiotics?
I understand the question.
Okay, got it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that science is definitely still evolving. So at this point, I would actually prefer to tell people, try to get some prebiotics in. What I think is worth noting based on what you're asking is that there are some prebiotics that fuel both the good and the bad bacteria. And then they also, which is why some people get a little bit sensitive to them, because if you've got an overgrowth of the bad bacteria and you haven't yet gotten rid of that, and then you feed them, then you will strengthen the good bacteria, but you'll also sort of strengthen a little bit the bad bacteria. As opposed to some of the prebiotics, which, as I've sort of slid into the conversation, selectively fuel the good, they're the ones that will end up, I guess, having a stronger bifidogenic effect with less of the negative side effects.
So that's super important. So that's a great lead in to who do you think needs to be, if you're a practitioner or if you're an individual watching this, who do you think needs to be concerned about prebiotic intake? You mentioned people that may not tolerate it well if they have some bad bacteria that hasn't been dealt with in terms of balance. Is that your small intestinal bacterial overgrowth kind of
Correct.
person? Okay.
Correct. Yeah. And I think that those people would often come and search for a practitioner to support them. And then there would be a blend of having to incorporate a probiotic supplement together with bringing in the prebiotics. But then you do have people that obviously, like with irritable bowel syndrome, that can be very nervous about consuming some of these prebiotics, which would fit into that FODMAP category. I think this is a really important subject, and I would love to be able to address it because I studied at the university that created the low FODMAP diet, so I feel very familiar with this, and I worked in private practice for years in this space. And what we find is that the low FODMAP diet is definitely not meant to be long term. So, and the studies are showing us that when people remove the FODMAPs and don't replace with some prebiotics, then the probiotics in their gut start to diminish, and it ends up being a worse situation. So what I would always suggest is that you, do the initial low FODMAP diet, work out what the trigger foods are, but then slowly start to reintroduce some of these prebiotics. And also be aware that not every single prebiotic is high FODMAP.
I think that's so smart. And what we're also hearing is, guys, your prebiotics are not going to have anything to feed if you're not getting the good bacteria in. And so it's really this, if you're taking probiotics or focusing on bringing those in, you need to get in the prebiotics. But if you're focusing on prebiotics, we need to work on that part. Practitioners, I think, one of my challenges with FODMAP is that it's become this stamped, hey, this is low FODMAP, this is this. We all know everybody's gut is different. And so I think one of the things you have to understand is that you are the gatekeeper of working with somebody on their FODMAP choices. And to your point, Kara, you need to be moving them along the way. It is an elimination diet, not a lasting diet. And I think that's really important. And I also had I was doing some consults the other day with some men as a group who all have Crohn's. And so one of the other pieces is if you have an inflammatory situation, an inflammatory bowel disease or an inflammatory disease, Again, this is going to be so important for you, but how you do it, and certainly these are not things to do when you have a flare-up. These are things to look at as more of your maintenance on that part. So a couple other questions that I had sort of canvassed to see what were the top questions that people had. And like, again, people are like, well, okay, just help me understand. We're back at the basics of what are prebiotics and how do I get them in. So one of the other questions that came up is they're very confused about sugar alcohols, all the things that end in like an OL or even OSE, like how are those, because those are often referred to as non-digested, and so I think there's confusion there. So yeah, let's go in.
Yeah. I would not put them in as prebiotics. They are not leading to a beneficial effect to us based on the science. So maybe something will be discovered in due course, but they are certainly not included at the moment as part of a definition.
Good. And so that also unfolds for people who have avoided sugar alcohols, that you can consider prebiotics, and we like that part. Okay, now I think we get into one of the areas that I think is the most fun. Of course, somebody said, how much prebiotic do I need to take to lose weight? So,
oh, wow. Okay.
Not an answer here, but what I want to talk about is how do you deliciously incorporate it in? And this is really that moment also to brag about Uplift, because I do think it's going to make people's lives much easier. But I'd love to hear, some of your favorite ways to get in prebiotics.
Yeah, I mean, I reckon I have prebiotics at every single meal and snack. So I really do practice what I preach. I'm to the extreme. So let's think about breakfast time. So at breakfast time, if you have oats that are not cooked, so if you have them as an overnight oats, in Australia we call it bircher muesli, they contain resistant starch. Once you heat them, you will lose most of that. Also, when let's think about I use the Daily Uplifter, and that has that xylooligosaccharide in it and the green banana flour and a little bit of Jerusalem artichoke. So you get this blend of 3 different types of prebiotics, which is particularly valuable. And that I work either into a smoothie. Some days when I think I'm going to get resistant starch somewhere else, and because the prebiotic fibers still remain when you heat them, I'll turn it into pancakes. So I just mix with some eggs, and then either ground up some oats or, some people like using a banana. I've got a recipe on my website. So, you can do that. In terms of vegetables, I think that's worth, making note. If you grill some asparagus, people who like asparagus, onion, it's better to have it raw, but I mix that through salads. That's a prebiotic. Some of the more denser types, which are not so readily consumed, but that you definitely can cook them to make them taste good, is something like Jerusalem artichoke. I find them in America inside salads, which is great, and at restaurants. So if you enjoy that, and then that green banana flour that I mentioned can be weaved into so many things. So, like I said, turn into bliss balls, energy balls, things like that.
I love it. So, and when we talk about Jerusalem artichoke, we'll also see sunchoke on the menu. So just referencing that for people. I will personally say that I am somebody who has had a not great experience, but that's also, and I think this is an interesting point, I think at one meal in one of my favorite places in Los Angeles, I had grilled, sauteed sunchokes, grilled cauliflower, and then grilled Brussels sprouts and sauteed with onions and garlic. Whoa, I think my belly was, 9 months pregnant and painful pretty quickly, but that's not, so I guess one of the questions is, when you're having some of those, what's a better partner with it? You mentioned eggs Yeah, so when you have cruciferous vegetables like the cauliflower and the Brussels sprouts as well, they themselves can lead to excessive gas. So I wouldn't put it all down to the Jerusalem artichoke. And I think that's really important for people to remember because oftentimes they would end up blaming the prebiotic fiber in a product or in a food. But I'm thinking, think about everything else that you just had at that meal that might have also caused a bit of gastric distress. So, people that are more sensitive to milk, if they had something as part of a cereal or in a smoothie and it was already with milk, and then they had this salad that you're mentioning with all those vegetables, well, even for people that don't have irritable bowel syndrome, you could end up having excessive gas and feel like you're bloated or pregnant by the end of the day. So, so does that answer your question, or was there? Totally answers. So our point is, especially for people following a plant-based diet, which is awesome, but really think about things like your nuts and seeds, like hemp seeds and Jerusalem artichoke, or, think about, and especially like the smaller beans as opposed to the bigger beans if you're doing, a veggie burger or a grain burger. So I love all that. I actually did not know the tip about the difference in the overnight oats and the cooked oats, so it makes me so happy on that part. And you mentioned in there you said it came quickly where you can cook, and so what you're meaning is the Daily Uplifter, which is your product, and I'm going to share the link for that, so people who want that, yay, you can get it now in the States. That particular product you can bake with, so you can use it in pancakes as well as you could make energy balls or these kinds of things. Is that what you were saying?
So basically, because it has probiotics and resistant starch and prebiotic fibers in it, so it gives you this whole blend, you will lose the probiotics and the resistant starch when you cook with it, but you will still get the prebiotic fibers. Okay. And you get the beneficial dose for the day. So I just like to say, get it in however you like. Like, yes, ideally have it raw, but if you want to cook with it and that'll get it in, fantastic.
Great. Oh, I love it. All right. So we're going to share information about the product, where you can get it. We'll share, that's probably the best way to reach you, Kara, and to connect on that part. And then any closing words about prebiotics and the revolution that you're ushering in here for a good mood from digestive health?
I just think it's really important for people to realize that, as much as people are supplementing with probiotics, or you're finding one little probiotic strain in a bar or in a cereal now, we are born with so many different types of probiotics already inside of us, and they are dying off because we're not feeding them. And that diversity is what's ultimately so important for preventing inflammation, all those lifestyle diseases, helping with weight management, and even helping with our mood. So I really, like, from the bottom of my heart, would want my colleagues and want other people to realize how beneficial it is to incorporate these prebiotics to support what they naturally have inside of them.
So you raise so of course, as soon as you talk, it raises more questions for me on that part. So in conclusion, so that leads me to pregnant women and also kids, like young kids, when you're saying we're born, with that part. So at what phase do you look at something like the Daily Uplifter or bringing in those prebiotic fibers for those groups?
Yeah, so the Daily Uplifter is 100% fine for pregnant, lactating, and for children. I have had so many young mothers contact me and say, "Can I give this to my baby?" And I've said, you build it up slowly. You don't have the full serve. But look, when you have baby supplements, they have GOS in them, which is a galacto-oligosaccharide. That is a prebiotic. Mother's milk has prebiotics in it. So it is super important at any age to bring in a small amount and build it up. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. Okay, fantastic. All right, we'll get that link. Kara, go ahead and just send me over that link in an email so that I can post it with this. I hope you all have enjoyed this. Of course, you can share it, and if you would like more information, and also if you're a healthcare practitioner and fitness professional, etc., anyone who's a better nutrition provider is welcome to connect with Kara, because you can also become an uplifter as well and share uplift with your community. So I love that, and keep those great recipes coming, because now I'm so excited for all the things I get to try. So totally
Thanks,
awesome.
Ashley.
Okay, have a great one, everybody. Bye. Thank you.